I think I mentioned it before in a video several months ago now. That like D&D's depiction of races gets an awful lot of attention, but less so much the fact that the game is more so even defined by the character's class. The character's race might provide a few bonuses and special abilities, but for the most part, it's kind of almost like just a set dressing marker. So you have a rough visualization for everyone as to what your character's supposed to look like and all that kind of stuff. Class is much more where they actually derive their in-adventure powers and abilities and what they're actually doing with themselves. And when we go back to the classic four classes as they were, in the old original versions of D&D, whichever version that is that you prefer, you have the fighter, the thief, the magic user / wizard, and the cleric. Now, low key, those actually do fit in with the classic medieval hierarchy caste system as it was. The thief rogues are basically your stand-in for your peasant commoners. They're ultimately actually the most concerned with money, and in many ways they are the ones that you could ultimately get a merchant out of. But they're limited to their social class. They're not particularly well finely educated. They don't have access to a huge amount of resources at first, and generally society frowns upon them, like leaving their farms or their service jobs or whatever it is they're doing. And so that leaves, in a medieval setting, about the only way that a commoner can go out and become an adventurer and make more of their life is to be a renegade, bandit, or outlaw, and eventually just amass enough of a fortune that you can buy your way in to the upper crust of society at higher levels. Fighters are basically, obviously the warrior class, from which a lot of nobles are derived. You can see that in the design of the old way fighters were put together in most of the earlier versions of D&D, where when you get up to around 10th level or so, the characters, permitted by society to found a stronghold and gather a following and all that kind of stuff. Whether or not they ever actually get the title from an established lord, or they just establish themselves as a lord on their own, fighters are all, as a class, on the path towards government right by military might, which is also part of the great medieval caste system. And at the top you have the clerics. Obviously, they're the fill-in for the church, although in D&D fantasy worlds you typically have a whole myriad of different competing churches from different region to different region. Kind of a blending in kind of a Greco-Roman style pantheistic view of cosmic nature and all that kind of stuff. Although typically all these various subcults are all actually part of a larger kind of pantheon belief structure in and of themselves. So in a way, you still actually kind of get a church superstructure, is just from town to town, from cult, from subsect to subsect. You can have dramatically different goals in leadership, much like how the church operated in medieval times, and its own kind of sectarian divisions between the different kinds of Benedictines and all the others. What were those guys who were really good at doing education and stuff? You know who I'm talking about. So the clerics translate easier. I feel that in some ways they should have kind of not be dialed so much into this combat cleric, pseudo crusader, hospitaller type of design that they have in the older D&D games. I think they should really lean more into the fact that these are highly educated people who are probably a bit more charisma based than wisdom based, and maybe dial down the amount of magic they wield. Not that you would remove holy miracles and all that kind of stuff from their repertoire entirely, but I would stave that off until higher levels. And at the beginning, they're healing people because they have knowledge of herbs and anatomy, and their characters are automatically literate, and are schooled in history and mythology and all that other kind of stuff. And that because the fact that they were brought up through a church system, they have had access to a greater amount of education than your average citizen. From both the fighter or the thief classes. Wizard / magic users, I would actually put down there as an alternative to rogue at the bottom of the pile. typically because they do rely on a certain amount of like an educated background to have learned magic. They probably come from like your middle to lower upper tiers, but not really from like the peasantry. However, they're renegade devil worshippers. They do something that rivals and potentially undermines the clergy's grip on the power structure, because it's through the clergy that grants dominion to the warriors, who then monitor, protect, and also make sure that that they stay working over the peasantry. And magicians kind of disrupt that whole thing. So in many ways, I kind of feel like they're actually the much more should be treated as the renegade category, even more so than your casual, everyday bandits and thieves. And I don't know. I guess that's about it. I could, go into more detail. You could think about this shit too on your own, goddammit, and come up with your own thoughts about that whole kind of way of framing things. Obviously, this doesn't take into account some of your more prestige class types that came in, later and further evolved versions of D&D, like your monks and your paladins and your druids and all that kind of stuff. All of which I am toying with as I continue to develop my own Tarot SRPG, which I think I'm just gonna straight out do like a player's rule book and then have like a card reader's rule book and maybe a setting book to go with it, because there are things I find about this rule system as I develop it that it does change the balance of things enough that I feel like it does kind of need an example to go along with it as to like what would make a Tarot SRPG game different than your standard D20 fantasy RPG, even though they kind of still draw along a lot of the same kind of basic elements, in which I will be playing with some of these notions that I have about how class should be treated within, because since it's a Tarot game, it's got a very heavily medieval kind of feel to how the rules are evolving, and so that should also be reflected in the setting and the characters as well. So anyway, stay tuned, stay waspinated, hit the buttons, and enjoy your day of